Captain Paul Watson. You've seen his direct actions on TV to save the whales. Now he's asking you to help stop the orca slave trade, notably at SeaWorld. That's next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, Captain Paul Watson, an original founder of Greenpeace who left it to start Sea Shepherd, famed for its courageous direct actions on behalf of animals. After 50 years on the sea, he now writes books to provoke the public and motivate activists to do more. His new book, Orcapedia, is a register of all the orcas in captivity, and it serves as a rallying call to stop what Watson unabashedly calls a slave trade. PETA actively works to end the suffering of imprisoned orcas, from its campaign to end SeaWorld's cruelty to its groundbreaking lawsuit that alleges SeaWorld violates the 13th Amendment, the constitutional prohibition of slavery. In my conversation with Captain Watson, he talks about the orcas held captive in the U.S. and around the world, including Lolita, who has been at the Miami Seaquarium for 50 years. PETA is suing the Seaquarium to force them to allow Lolita to be moved to a seaside sanctuary in her home waters. And we also talk about the moment that changed his life and why he's dedicated to the animals. But first, the book Orcapedia, written with co-author Tiffany Humphrey. It shows all the orcas held captive around the world, as well as those who've died. It's a document of those orcas caught in a slave trade that will make any person think twice before visiting SeaWorld. Here's my conversation of Sea Shepherd's famed Captain Paul Watson about his new book, Orcapedia, on the PETA Podcast. What strikes me about this book is the framework. Everyone knows Wikipedia. If you have a Wikipedia page, you're fortunate, you've done something. To put the orcas into that context that people know, Orcapedia, I think communicates, what you want to communicate instantly. It's everything you always wanted to know about these specific orcas. And the framework, I think, is the achievement of the book. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that a lot of people are aware of just how many orcas have been captured and how many have died in captivity and how many are presently in captivity, and that it's right around the planet. They're all over. People are aware of, say, the orca in SeaWorld in San Diego, or the orca in, say, in Florida, but they don't really see the big picture of where all of these captive wonderful animals are being kept. And it is a slave trade. It's exactly what it is. These are highly intelligent, sentient, self-aware beings that we're just bartering and selling for profit and for amusement.
Yeah, you say that, and that was going to be my next question, that, people tend to forget because they'll see the orcas at SeaWorld and they say, okay, yeah, we're against SeaWorld. But you put it into context here with this Orcapedia, all the information. And the thing that strikes me is that you write how it constitutes this slave trade. And I think that's something that, again, people don't necessarily take the leap and understand that this is what's happening to these free, wild, these animals in the wild. Now they're essentially in this format, not of their choosing. So just talk a little bit more about the analogy to slave. It's more than just an analogy. It's the reality for these animals.
We're pulling these wonderful creatures from their families in various places of the ocean, off Iceland, off of British Columbia, whatever. It's very traumatizing to them. We pull them away from their mothers. And then we put them into a situation with other orcas, which are not even related to them. And in fact, they have different languages, which not many people are aware of. That an orca in British Columbian waters has a completely different dialect than an orca in Icelandic waters. So they're almost like aliens together there. And in many cases, they're that causes a lot of conflict and that. So it's we don't really think too much about how they think, how they feel, what just what they're suffering. People just don't think about that at all. One of the things I find most fascinating is that there's not been a single recorded case of an orca in the wild attacking and killing a human being. It's never happened. But 3 people have been killed by orcas in captivity. And people say, well, why did they do that? And I said, well, just to picture yourself walking through the exercise yard of a maximum security prison full of serial killers. There's some people with some deep psychological problems. That's a risky endeavor. Many of these orcas are seriously mentally disturbed because of the confinement and because of the way they've been treated. And they're not normal. And just interrelating with them is a risky endeavor for the people who are involved on that. They're unpredictable in that sense.
And so when they're unpredictable, is that because of where the context in which they're placed, this enslaved sense? Is that what creates this instability in them?
Incredible frustration being cooped up in those cells. It's like being in isolation or just with a couple of prisoners in a cell for the rest of your life. And no longer being able to swim freely in the ocean, no longer to be amongst your family. And it's incredibly alien environment that they've been put into. And there's a lot of trauma that's involved in that. I've swum with orcas in the wild, and it was an amazing experience. It was way back in the 70s, but we were in a boat in the Bella Bella Straits in British Columbia when saw a pod of orcas coming towards us. These are transient orcas, and we 3 of us jumped in the water right in front of them. Now I can tell you, seeing orcas from the deck of a boat and seeing orcas when just your head's sticking out of the water is 2 completely different perspectives. Suddenly, the first thought that comes to me is, these guys eat sea lions, and they're bigger than we are. And then suddenly the whole pod disappeared. Now, the only thing more stressful than a pod of oncoming orcas was a pod of orcas that suddenly disappeared. Now you don't know where they are. And they surfaced right beside us, so close. I reached out and grabbed, I don't know why I did this. I reached out and grabbed the dorsal of the one that passed me, and he pulled me through the water for 100 meters or so, and then just flipped me off, and I was tumbling in his wake. You don't go up to a lion in the Serengeti and pet it. But here, the most formidable predator on the planet allowed me to do that. Now, I don't think it's because they like us. I think it's because they understand us, that they know what we're capable of. Way back in 1910, some orcas broke the ice under some of Captain Scott's party in Antarctica, and they broke the ice. But when they realized that they weren't penguins, they left. They could have taken them, but they didn't. Again, they're able to distinguish, to determine what is, what they take, because I think they're extremely intelligent. The human brain, it's a 1,700 cubic centimeter organ. The orca has a 6,000 cubic centimeter brain. The sperm whale brain's a 9,000 cubic centimeter brain. And the convolutions on the neocortex area of both the sperm whale and the orca are far more pronounced than they are on the primate brain. And also, mice to men, we have 3 lobes to the brain, but cetaceans have 4 lobes. And that 4th lobe is almost all associative behavior. Their ability to communicate is way off the charts, anything that we understand.
They know what they're doing. It's no mistake with the way when the orcas there wasn't a confrontation, but when they engaged with you, they knew what they were doing. They're dangerous to predators or to their enemies, but to someone like yourself, they could be indifferent, be nice, and then go on, right? I mean,
I think it's because they choose to live in a state of peaceful coexistence with us. Yeah. That's what they want, because they know what we can do. I mean, we exterminated pods of orcas off Iceland, shot them down with machine guns back in the 60s. They were regularly shot at by fishermen for many, many, many years. When I was in the Canadian Coast Guard in 1969, I had a captain on there we saw a pod of orcas off of British Columbia, and he says, "Got to watch for those. I've seen those guys eat people like you wouldn't believe. They're the most ferocious monsters on the planet." Well, he never saw anybody get eaten by an orca, but it was just some myth that he's relating, and they embellished and everything else like that. But people were really afraid of them. And so I can tell you in 1975, when I went into the water with the orcas, it was after hearing stories about how they were such monsters. So we were really confronting that fear when we did that. And we discovered something amazing, that they are not the monsters that people perceive them to be.
The killer whales are only killers when they have to? Is that it? Out of self-defense, maybe?
Yeah, well, that they're predators. There's no doubt about that, and but also they distinguish. There's some orcas in British Columbia that only eat fish, and some that only eat marine mammals. The residents orcas eat fish. The transients eat marine mammals. So they're not the same, and they don't actually. They sometimes intermingle, but they don't really work together. So they're like two different tribes of orcas in that. But we've seen them in Antarctica, in the North Atlantic, the South Pacific. I mean, orcas are everywhere. They're not a lot of them, but they're there, and you see them.
So let's get back to this point about enslavement, because that's a powerful word. And when you mention it, there'll be some pushback to say, how can you say, you can't really say they're enslaved?
Well, they, by every definition of slavery, they're captured and taken from their group, their pod. They're separated from their mother and from their brothers and sisters. They're pulled away from that. They're taken to an alien environment and forced to serve their masters. And the masters are the aquarium facilities that basically force them to do tricks and to entertain people. So to me, that's the very definition of slavery: being controlled by your masters to do things to make a profit for your masters. Yeah. And especially when you're dealing with highly intelligent creatures. I personally believe that orcas are more intelligent than we are. But of course, a lot of people push back on that and say, I had a whaler in Norway one time. He says, Watson, you say whales are more intelligent than we are. How can you say such a stupid thing? And I said, well, George, I measure intelligence by the ability to live in harmony with your natural environment. And by that criteria, orcas are far more intelligent than we are. And he looked at me and said, well, by that criteria, cockroaches are more intelligent than we are. I said, George, you're beginning to understand what I'm trying to tell you. Yeah. We measure intelligence by hand-eye coordination, the ability to make tools. If a blob of protoplasm stepped out of a spaceship tomorrow, we'd automatically assume it's intelligent because it has technology. But it's a blob of protoplasm. Yeah. But so to us, intelligence is a tool. Intelligence is a gun. That's what we define intelligence by. But if a dog were to walk into the room, it could tell you who was there yesterday if it was able to tell you, but it knows.
Yeah. So these highly intelligent beings enslaved, as you see it, and PETA is our listeners to our podcast know that we've talked about the lawsuit that PETA filed, saying that using the orcas as slaves were in violation of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. What kind of lives should orcas be living? Born free, they should live free. If they weren't in small chlorinated concrete tanks, what would the ideal life be?
Well, the ideal life is to be free in their natural environment, to do what orcas do. One of the problems, of course, is that some orcas have been born to captivity. What do we do with them? Because they don't know anything else. And that's where this idea of sea pens came in, is to have large areas, say like cut off a fjord or a bay, and reintroduce the orcas into that so that they can learn how to survive within that small ecosystem, and before they can be released. But we know they can be released, because that was successfully happened, with the whole Free Willy thing and everything. And that Keiko was released and survived in the wild. He died of tuberculosis, but he got that tuberculosis in captivity.
Yeah.
Not in the wild. So it wasn't anything in the wild that killed him. But see, the aquarium peoples are there going, well, see, we released him and he died. Yeah, a year later of a disease which he contracted while he was in captivity. That certainly is an indication that they can't fend for themselves.
See, this is one of the great things about your new book, Orcapedia, a guide to the victims of the international orca slave trade, that you co-wrote with Tiffany Humphrey. I'm looking at Macayo. And I guess I'm attracted to Macayo because we have the same birth date. And then I'm looking at Makayo, and I see that he's at SeaWorld, and he was born in captivity, Makayo. And seventh calf, I mean, you go into the whole background. First, it says Makayo is Katina's seventh calf. Katina's first calf, Kalina, passed away on October 4th, 2010, only 5 days before Makayo was born. And it says that is there hope for Makayo to get out? I mean, he was hurt in 2014. You get a whole history of these orcas, and it's just fascinating because now that I know that I share a birthday with Makayo, I care for this Makayo who's in Orlando at SeaWorld.
That's what we're hoping the book will do, is have people identify that these are really feeling, intelligent, self-aware, sentient beings.
Well, what's the hope for Makayo? Sea pens? Can he get out?
I think that the sea pen is a transition to captivity. And what we do, for instance, we know what the dialects are. John Ford's work with studying orca dialects has demonstrated. We can tell from an orca in captivity where it came from, whether it came from Iceland, whether it came from the West Pacific Northwest. And therefore, we should look at reintroducing them into the area where they were originally came from so that they can be reconnected with their pods. Orcas have incredible memories. I'm sure that they would be able to, bring any of these individuals back into the pod if given the opportunity to do that.
It wouldn't be difficult to take an orca that's been in, say, Orlando and bring it back to the Pacific Northwest? No?
Well, that would be the thing to do. Yes, is if it's from the Pacific Northwest, we set up a sea pen in the Pacific Northwest for maybe a year or two, and also put that sea pen in a position where it's in the pathway of orca pods. So therefore, the orca within the sea pen can hear the orcas on the outside and see how they respond, and the ones on the outside can hear the one that's in the sea pen, and that would be the first step to reintroduction to the pods.
So, all right. So, I like I said, I mentioned Makayo. He happens to be in captivity. I'm concerned about him. Your book starts out with the famous ones, and Keiko, of course, people know. Tilikum, people know. They're all featured here. But I'm particularly moved by Lolita, who was stolen from her family in 1970 off the coast of Washington and has been held in a 35 by 80 foot tank for 50 years.
And not only has she been held for 50 years, but she's being held alone. And these are highly social animals. It's a form of cruelty. And I believe that people have offered a lot of money to have Lolita released, but they refused. Yeah. So it is frustrating in that respect. I would like to see legislation that would shut these things down. We're seeing this in Canada. Canada actually passed legislation to shut it down, and hopefully that will extend to other countries. We're suing marine land in southern France and trying to get it shut down because a few years ago they had a flood there, which had a lethal impact on a lot of the residents, and because they didn't take the proper measures. So we're suing them on the grounds that they're negligent and incompetent, and hopefully we'll find a way to release those orcas.
So I mentioned Lolita. I also mentioned Makayo. Just from flipping the book, I found Makayo. I'm now bonded with Makayo. You've dealt with orcas for much of your life. Tell me about the ones you've been able to meet, and which orcas have particularly moved you?
I have met Tilikum when Tilikum was captive in Victoria, British Columbia. I spent a lot of time with Skana, who was really one of the first settlers ever put into captivity at the Vancouver Aquarium. And at one point, Dr. Paul Spong was studying. He was hired by the Vancouver Aquarium to study Skana, and suddenly realized that Skana was studying him. And he became quite radicalized about this whole thing and said, this orca does not belong here. And of course, he was fired by the Vancouver Aquarium for doing that. But while he was there, he took people like Bob Hunter and myself in to meet Scanna. And I remember one point, Bob Hunter put his face down, and Scanna came up with her mouth wide open and took Bob's entire head in her mouth. Then her teeth touched the sides of his head, just gently, and then pulled back. And what Paul Spong said to Bob Hunter was, "That's her showing that she trusts you, and also ask seen if you trust her." And so I've had that experience in the wild with an unnamed orca, because they don't have names, of actually having my hand go over the teeth and onto the tongue, which could literally lose your hand. But the orca didn't take my hand. This, I don't know of any other animal really that you can quite have that kind of experience with.
Tell me, when you experience that with an orca in the wild, and then I imagine you have encountered or met some in captivity, and are they different? Yeah. Are they different when you see them in captivity? And then would they respond in the same way that the wild orca would, where the wild orca is actually gentler and
no, I think that the ones in captivity were gentler because there's closer things, but it wasn't a question of the one in the wild being not gentle. I think the best way to describe the difference is that the one in the wild the attitude was sort of like, oh, nothing here really. This is just amusing.
just a human.
It's like he didn't have to be there.
Yeah.
He was perfectly free to do it. With Scanna and those, there was nowhere there for them to go. They had to. And, when people say, well, they do these tricks willingly, I think, no, first of all, they do it for one reason, for food. Second, because they're bored. They're easily bored. And so they do a lot of these things to get around that boredom. But the training is not gentle. There's a lot of food deprivation that goes into that process. So they are punished on that. I think one of the most disgusting things that they do is they literally masturbate the males to get the semen for reproductive purposes in the aquarium or the marine captivity trade. Right. So, and that actually is something that was done also during the days of slavery, days of human slavery, where you had breeding programs that were designed in order to produce a stronger worker, in the plantation. So again, that shares that characteristic with slavery.
Well, it's funny, when I talked to John Hargrove, he talked about that act in order to save the sperm. And he talked about how the sperm is really what is used to spread out worldwide this slave trade, because now you can breed them all over the world. And I love your book because it shows all the pictures and headstones of the deceased and the pictures of the living. But the picture that got me the most was the map of the world, to show where all these places are that have where the orcas are held captive. You have a place in Russia, Japan, China. They're in France and Spain. How do we stop this? I mean, I guess can we control the sperm or the reproductive means to breed, or how do we stop this from going on in that way?
Well, now that we have Canada and India, places that are actually having legislation to stop this captivity, hopefully that we can get the United Nations involved to have international regulations, to shut it down, on the grounds that it's immoral and that it's also it's destructive ecologically. We're actually taking these animals out of their ecosystems. But also, the lifespan of an orca is pretty much similar to the lifespan of a human being. And but once in captivity, their average lifespan is much lower. Lolita is actually an exception to the rule. She's been there for 50 years. But if the ones that are born in captivity, is very high mortality on the newborns. But if they get to past 30, they're doing pretty good. But it's not a healthy system for them, and it kills them. Over 200 of them have died in captivity, way before their time.
Yeah, the headstones in the book are really, they're very emotional to see them, and some of them have names. Many of them have names, but a lot of them have no names. There's a lot of unnamed orcas that you also have a headstone for. What is it like when you go through the headstones and see all the orcas who have died in captivity?
Well, I remember the ones that I knew that had died on that. I remember Scanna when she died. What they wanted to do there was so disrespectful. The first thought was, well, let's just sell her to a dog food company, and make dog food out of her. And of course, a lot of public protests against that, and they ended up burying her at sea. But because to the captivity industry, they're just a commodity. That's all they are. They're just commodities. They don't really give much thought to the fact that these are sentient, thinking, emotional, feeling beings. They just don't.
Detail the complicity of SeaWorld in this orca slave trade. If SeaWorld was not a part of this, would it still exist? Would it be minor? Would it be small? Or because SeaWorld is such a corporate entity with not necessarily unlimited funds, but they have, a large amount of funds that they protect for their shareholders, but they insist that this is their trade. So detail the complicity here of SeaWorld in keeping this going.
SeaWorld demonstrated that huge profits can be made from this. And of course, that was picked up by, other countries and that. And it's a very profit-intensive industry, to the point where one orca can be worth millions of dollars on that. And the sale of the sperm from the orcas can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's SeaWorld, I think, has contributed greatly to the success of the industry overall globally. But also, who else are complicit? All of us who actually buy the tickets and sit there and watch this without really giving much thought to what the suffering of the creatures that we're watching. And I think all of us at some point were guilty of doing that, and we didn't think too much of it at the time. I say, occasionally younger people will respond and say, well, they think that there's something wrong with it, but they really can't put their finger on it and that. But it's like the whole concept of zoos really is just disrespectful and demeaning. Not many realize that the comparison back in the 20s, they used to go into, say, mountain gorilla colonies, kill all the adults, and just take the babies off to the zoos. And they do this with a lot of animals, kill off the adults and take the babies off to the zoos. Well, this is what they were doing with orcas for a long time. And certainly what they're doing with dolphins right now in Taiji, Japan, for example. Kill everything and just take the select ones for the aquarium trade that they're doing. And so the comparisons are really there.
I'm sorry, Paul, but what do they accomplish by doing that, by killing all the others?
I don't know. I never really understood the logic behind it. I know in Taiji, what they do is they go in, they round up the dolphins. They say this one and this one is worth $200,000 for the marine aquarium trade. So we're going to keep those ones, kill the rest, and we'll sell the meat off to to whatever, dog food or whatever anybody wants it for. So it's just the Taiji dolphin drive would not exist without the marine aquarium industry. There's not enough money in killing dolphins for the meat. The money is with the aquarium industry. Yeah. And so that's what carries it on. A lot of people don't realize too that back in the 20s in Belgium, that they had people in zoos. People were taken out of the Congo and put in zoos on exhibits. And you actually have photographs of people going to the zoos and trying to feed the little, black children in the things. I mean, it's amazing that, what we've endured in this kind of sick trade. And of course, we're getting better and better. I mean, we don't do that anymore.
Well,
and we don't kill off mountain gorilla adults and get the babies anymore. Yeah. But, it's still there.
Paul, when you mentioned the Congo, in the 20s, well, here in America, 1904, the World's Fair, and it happens with colonized people. The Americans were going into the Philippines, my forebears, my ancestry, and they brought Filipinos from Mindanao, from all the different provinces, brought them to the World's Fair in 1904, and put them in essentially a human zoo. Yeah. 1904. It was there to sell imperialism to the Americans. We must save these people, right? They need our help, and it's a way
they certainly killed a lot in the Philippines in the process.
Oh yeah, as a result of the Philippine-American War, nearly based on some accounts, up to 1 million people, and not directly from the war, but from the famine and from all the things resulting. It just seems that we just never learn. I mean, your example from the Congo, the gorillas, and now what we're doing to the orcas. It seems that the empathetic way doesn't seem to be working very much.
I think also the problem is with humans is that we have this, I call it a collective form of mass psychosis called anthropocentrism, this idea that we're better than everything else, we're dominant over everything else, that we're apart from everything else. And as long as we have that attitude, we're going to continue to, commit these atrocities. We have to go back to what we originally were many, many thousands of years ago, of having a biocentric point of view, which a lot of indigenous people have today, which is this understanding that we're part of everything and that we have to live in harmony with all other species, and that we're not better than them. In fact, in many cases, we're not even as important as them. I mean, we couldn't live on this planet without worms, trees, bees, and fish, but they can certainly get along without us. So, in that respect, they're more important ecologically than we are.
Well, the harmony issue, back to what you were saying about the intelligence of the orcas, living in harmony with their environment and with peacefully coexisting. A lot of people know you from the television show and from your direct action. Are you still doing that? What kind of direct action do you continue to do today? Why was it important to do such direct action? Could what you want be accomplished be done without it? Or was it just necessary at the time?
Well, I was a founding director for the Greenpeace Foundation, which is protesting. And I came to the understanding that protesting was too submissive. It was like, please, please don't kill the whales. And they do it anyway. And all we did was hang banners and take pictures. So I set Sea Shepherd up to intervene. And so that's what we do. We're an interventionist, anti-poaching organization. And the strategy that we develop is, I call it aggressive nonviolence. So we don't injure anybody. In 42 years, we haven't. But we have saved, literally hundreds of thousands of animals and shut down hundreds and hundreds of illegal operations. Just this last week, we arrested 6 poaching vessels in the waters of Sierra Leone. Over the last year, 65 vessels that we've seized that were poaching in those waters. And, we're working in the Gulf of Mexico right now in the Sea of Cortez to protect the endangered vaquita. I have 3 vessels there. And if it wasn't for that, I'm pretty confident that the vaquita would now be extinct. So Sea Shepherd now is a global movement with, we have 12 ships out on the ocean. And at any given time, about 250 volunteers from about 25 different nations. And so that's, I think, the thing I'm most proud of is what started as an organization is now a global movement. And it's no longer even in my control. I'm just part of that movement now.
And I guess at first you went out there, but you don't do that still, do you? Or
well, I do go, consult with the ship. So the reason I can't go out there is not that I don't want to. It's because Japan has put me on the Interpol Red Notice, preventing me from traveling because they charged me with conspiracy to trespass. Now, I'll tell you, the Interpol Red Notice is for serial killers, war criminals, and major drug traffickers. And I'm the only person in history to be put on that list for conspiracy to trespass. But that just really shows you the power that Japan has in that. So I can go to France and I can come back to the U.S., but I can't go to. I'm both a U.S. and Canadian citizen, but I can't go into Canada because the Canadians will send me off to Japan. And here's interesting conspiracy to trespass on a whaling ship. I didn't actually do it. I conspired to do it, apparently.
Do you miss not going out there, or you can go to some places, but not all? But what?
Well, I do miss it, but I spend a lot of time writing right now. But I've spent 50 years on the sea, and so it's. But the great thing about it is I got literally dozens and dozens of captains and officers and engineers and directors out there who are doing it right now. So, it's that to me is very satisfying. That in fact we're getting more done now than we ever done in our entire history.
So the term you used again was aggressive
nonviolence.
Aggressive nonviolence. Where is the line? How aggressive? Because
you don't cause injury.
Well, because from the other perspective, they're seeing you come, in the confrontational mode, and they're, what is their reaction to your aggressiveness?
Well, the mythology actually works in our favor. A lot of the people we oppose think that we're real terrorists and we kill people, and that's fine. If they want to think that, that's just fine, because when we show up, they're scared and they run. But the reality is we don't hurt anybody. About 12 years ago, I was invited to give a lecture to the FBI in Quantico, and after the lecture, one of the FBI agents said, well, sea shepherds walk in a pretty fine line when it comes to the law. And I said, yes, but it doesn't matter how fine that line is if we don't actually cross the line. And we don't cross that line. We operate within the boundaries of the law and within the boundaries of practicality. And our opposition are criminals. These are poachers. These are people who are doing illegal things. And they said, well, you destroy property. Yes, we do. We confiscate fishing gear, and we've sunk ships and everything, all which are engaged in illegal activity. And to me, that is aggressive nonviolence. If a poacher is about to shoot an elephant, and you walk up and smack the rifle out of his hand and break the rifle, that is an act of nonviolence. You're preventing the killing of a sentient being by the destruction of a non-sentient object. That is a definition of aggressive nonviolence. Like I said, we don't hurt anybody, and that's a record that we're very, very proud of, and we intend to keep it.
During the years of this aggressive nonviolence, any top memory? Is there that kind of motivating memory that you have?
Well, we've never backed down on any of those confrontations, and that reputation has helped us considerably, because our opposition knows that we're not going to back down. And we realize what the risks are. When people join the crew, I ask them this question: are you willing to risk your life to protect a whale or a shark? And if they say no, they say, well, then we can't use you. And when people say, that's really asking an awful lot for people to risk their life to protect a whale, I said, really, is it? We ask young people not only risk their life, but to kill people for the defense of oil wells, real estate, religion, and flags. I think it's a far more noble pursuit to risk your life to protect an endangered species or a threatened habitat.
I guess you get the good people signed up for Sea Shepherd then, huh?
We got a lot of people who, I think we've had over 7,000 volunteers that have participated on that. But even more important is that I think that we instill in our volunteers this understanding, this idea that each and every one of us can change the world. We just have to harness our passion to courage and imagination and go forward and do it. And so many of my crew members have done just that. In fact, PETA was established originally by Alex Pacheco, who was one of my crew members in 1979.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So it's funny because here you talk about 79. Here we are, 2021. Are we close to seeing the time when we can all just retire and say we are in that perfect world now, and we don't have to worry about the bad guys and the animals are fine?
Well, that would certainly be nice. But I do tell people to not be pessimistic and not to be deterred by the situation. When people say, yeah, but it's impossible to solve these problems. Well, the answer to an impossible problem is to find an impossible solution. And how do you do that? Through passion, courage, and imagination. The very idea in 1972 that Nelson Mandela would be president of South Africa was unthinkable, therefore impossible. And yet the impossible became possible. And I think that holds true with pretty much all of these problems that we encounter. We can solve impossible problems.
And where do you assess where we are now, from the beginnings of Greenpeace, Sea Shepherd, your work with the Orcas? Where do you think we are now?
Well, I remember being a vegetarian in the late 70s when that was considered an extremely radical thing to do, and nobody even knew what a vegan was. Yeah, I mean, back then, if you said, "Oh, I'm a vegan," what's that mean? You're from the planet Vega or something? Nobody had it. The vegetarian, then the vegan movement is the fastest growing movement on this planet. I mean, it's amazing what has been accomplished and how it's evolved in just 40 years. It's incredible, and it's getting more and more. People are being recruited into this, and more importantly, they're being recruited by an understanding that this is what is right, not only right for respect for animals, but also right for the planet. And so I think that we've made a lot of progress in that respect.
I think you have. And in terms of the orcas, to get back to the book, Orcapedia, I really think I was just flipping through it, like I said, and going to try to find my orca. This is sort of like not that I'd go to SeaWorld, but if I were to go to SeaWorld and they would give me a program, or let's say if someone were to go to SeaWorld and they had a program, this would be the anti-program. You would present this to...
Well, I do know they don't sell that book in SeaWorld.
Well, this would be the great anti-program that a tourist could have and say, and if I were to read this before going to SeaWorld, it would make me go to the rides and maybe have a vegetarian thing at the food stand, if they have that, and then leave.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people who go to these marine captivity facilities today and as spectators, and they really don't give it much thought, but they're really no different than the people who used to go to freak shows in the 19th century, and without any concern or empathy for the people who were in those shows, who were deformed or had problems and everything like that. All they saw was entertainment. And this is what most spectators see, is just entertainment. They don't really give any thought or compassion to the beings which are being exploited to provide that entertainment.
Well, certainly your book has given me a lot more insight than I thought I had some, but then now I look at it, it's all in one thing, this book, Orcapedia, that you've co-written with Tiffany Humphrey.
And I should point out that, Tiffany did most of the work on that, so she deserves the credit on it.
Well, all right. I didn't want to give her short shrift, certainly. And but before we say goodbye, I know that you must have a favorite story that encapsulates what you're about.
There's one story that, really was a defining point in my life, which involved a whale. And that was in 1975 when we came up with this idea to protect the whales from the Soviet whaling fleet in the North Pacific. And we were reading a lot of Gandhi at the time. So we came up with this idea that all we had to do was put ourselves between the harpoon and the whales and we'd save the whales. That was the idea. And so in June of 1975, Bob Hunter and I were in a small inflatable boat in front of a Soviet harpoon vessel that was bearing down on us at full speed. And in front of us were 8 sperm whales that were fleeing for their life. And every time the harpooner tried to take a shot, I would block the path of the harpoon. And this worked for about 20 minutes until the captain on the Soviet vessel came running down the catwalk, and he screamed into the ear of the harpooner, then brought his finger across his neck like that and looked down on us and smiled. And that's when I realized Gandhi's not going to work for us today. And a few moments later, there's this incredible explosion, and the harpoon flew over our heads and slammed into the backside of a female in the pod, and it exploded. And she screamed. It didn't even occur to me that a whale would scream. And she rolled on her side in a fountain of blood, and suddenly the largest whale in that pod slammed the water with his tail and dove, and he swam right underneath of us, threw himself out of the water straight at the bow of the Soviet vessel. But they were ready for him with an unattached harpoon, pulled the trigger, hit him point blank range in the head. He screamed back, rolling in agony on the surface. And as he did, I caught his eye, and he looked straight at me, and then he dove again. And this time I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming at us real fast. And he came up and out of the water so that the next thing was to come crashing down on our small boat. And as his head rose up out of the water, I could see his eye right there. It was only a couple of feet from me, so close I could see my reflection in that eye. And what I saw in that eye is what changed my life forever. I saw understanding. The whale understood what we were trying to do, because I could see the effort he made to pull himself back, and he began to slide back into the sea. I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface, and he died. Could have killed us, and he chose not to do so. So I personally owe my life to that whale. But I also saw something else in that eye, pity, not for himself, but for us, that we could take life so thoughtlessly without any, empathy at all. And as I sat there in this little rubber boat in the middle of the Soviet whaling fleet and the sun was going down, I said to myself, why are they killing these whales? They don't eat them. Sperm whales are killed for oil, spermaceti oil, which is highly prized for high heat resistant lubricating oil. And one of the things that was mostly prized for in the Soviet Union was as a lubricating oil for the construction of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I said, here we are, destroying these incredibly beautiful, self-aware, sentient creatures for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it hit me. We're insane. We're certainly ecologically insane. And from that moment on, I said, look, I don't do this for people. I do it for them. And I know 10 years later, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet in Reykjavik. And a former colleague from Greenpeace, he approached me and said, what you did in Iceland was reprehensible. It's unforgivable, and you're an embarrassment for the whole movement. And I said, so? And he says, aren't you concerned about what people think? I said, didn't sink those whaling ships for you or for Greenpeace or for any human being. Sunk them for the whales. Find me a whale anywhere on the planet that disagreed with what we did, and I promise you, we won't do it again. But until then, we're going to continue to do it.
Wow. So you never forgotten that whale that saved your life, that you looked him in the eye, huh?
No, I saw so much in that eye that it was certainly a life-changing experience. And I've seen that intelligence in the eyes of whales and dolphins and elephants and so many other creatures around the world. It's there, or we just choose to see it.
Captain Paul Watson, the Canadian-American marine conservation activist who founded Sea Shepherd in 1977. His new book, co-authored with Tiffany Humphrey, is called Orcapedia, published by Groundswell Books. Info in the show notes. And for more on protesting SeaWorld and its enslavement of orcas, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send the link of this show to your friends, your really good friends, and your friends who might think about going to SeaWorld, and they need some convincing. And this book, Orcapedia, it could do that. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast, of course, and, contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on amok.com, or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's at aldef.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.